The story begins with the camera slowly moving away from 3 doors and a corridor. During the opening credits, we see several different locations. One of them includes a rusty car with a doll in the passenger seat. Another has an elderly woman making food. Jumping into the film, a policeman named Paul gets radioed about a female shoplifter. A detective wants to give him a call, but Paul calls him to say something has come up. Another central character is Zoe, whom we briefly observe playing her guitar somewhere. Meanwhile, Paul sits at an outdoor restaurant and gets a message from a woman named Shauna. She wants him to call her because she has some leads for him. Yet the man writes that the case is closed and that he is busy. She responds by saying she is only trying to help. Plus, she wants to see him. Being a polite person, he tells her to stop texting him. Soon his partner Zoe joins him. Once Paul says he missed her, she replies he would not have if he was at her show last night. His excuse is that everyone is all over him and he has been working 6 shifts. Zoe claims her gig was great, with the sole problem being Paul's absence. Shortly after, we learn Paul wants to go to Aruba. However, he says this desire is shared by both of them. So far, we don't know if he's slapping this desire onto Zoe, or if it's actually what she wants to. Switching the scenery, we see a couple sitting elsewhere. The elderly woman we saw earlier sits near them. She is Audrey, who thinks the couple does not look like local. She could tell due to their lack of appropriate Florida clothing. When she touches the girl's hair, the latter is made to feel uncomfortable. Audrey also shares that her friend owns a perfume store, and she would love to invite the couple to acquire some perfume, but the guy says his girlfriend has enough of them. Opposing those words, Audrey says, "A woman today has to be independent. That kind of relationship is a good one." The moment the couple starts to leave, Audrey tries to hold the girl's hand. She wants the girl to see her orchid collection. Unfortunately for her, the couple leaves, finding her to be needy. Back to the other couple, Zoe says she doesn't know when she wants to visit Aruba. She wants to do some soul searching, which Paul complains about. There is a place she wants to go to called Key Lime. This makes Paul question if there is someone else. He thinks there always is. There is no one, claims Zoe. He continues to feel upset, and eventually she leaves. Checking his phone, Paul sees Shauna has insulted him too. That is 2 strikes in 1 minute. Later, Paul calls Zoe to say he doesn't want her to leave. Knowing how hard this is for him, she says she is sorry. Later, we see her performing on her guitar with her musical crew. When she's done with that, Zoe drives alone somewhere. Eventually, she arrives at the house of a psychic. The man lays out his tarot cards and tells her to pick one. Once she does, he says there is a lot of evil around her. There is also an end to a certain love. Picking another card, Zoe learns people are looking for her now. At this moment, she tells the psychic he is scaring her, but he says she's the one who came there for a reading. All he's doing is interpret what the cards say. Zoe was drawn to the idea of visiting a psychic due to thinking she would learn something positive about her future. Alas, she is upset with what she's received. Following this, she drives through what looks like the woods. Soon she arrives at a location and exits her car. Our attention is briefly brought to a crocodile swimming in the water. Upon seeing something peculiar, Zoe runs back into her car. Subsequently, she arrives at the Key Lime Inn. A woman on the porch sees her and calls Zoe by her name. Upon asking the woman how she knew her name, Zoe does not get an answer. Inside the inn, Zoe tells her, the innkeeper, that she is a singer and a songwriter. This information amazes the woman. Later, we see Zoe in her room, remembering her argument with Paul. To let off some steam, she goes to the local bar, where a man named Peter starts talking to her. He guesses correctly that she's not from Key Lime. The woman is from Maryland, and she's visiting Key Lime for 3 days. Peter wants to bring her to Audrey tomorrow. He says she has an orchid farm. When she says she loves orchids, Peter reveals that Audrey breeds them with different species. The next day, Peter visits Audrey. He mentions meeting Zoe at the bar yesterday. He wants Zoe to visit the elderly woman and tells her something interesting. He emphasizes to Audrey to make sure that this time her guest does not disappear. When she cryptically asks what he did to the last one, Peter asks her the same question. In the meantime, we observe a teal mask in the water. Audrey asks if he thinks she buried a certain female in a pot. Switching to Paul, we see him searching for something in a car. He finds a guitar and smashes it against the wall, but soon he feels bad about what he did. Back at Key Lime, Zoe is now in Audrey's area. The latter educates Zoe about her orchids. One interesting fact she tells her guest is that the orchids try to replicate another insect, so the insect will engage in the reproductive act with the plant. Zoe compliments Audrey for her extensive knowledge of her plants. They have more orchids than any other state in the United States, Audrey adds. At that moment, Peter enters the scene, telling Audrey to give Zoe some of her key lime pie, for she is famous for it. Laughing, Audrey remarks she makes the best there is. At the other end, we see a detective talking to a man in his car. The former is Lopez, asking the man to step out of his car. Obeying the command, the man says he's not feeling too welcome and asks if he's in trouble. Shifting to Audrey in her home, we see her with something that looks like a huge female voodoo doll. Meanwhile, Paul is pacing frantically back at his place. On a phone call from someone, he says he had not heard anything from Zoe. All he knows is she was headed to Key Lime. After the phone call, Paul continues to feel troubled and dramatically remembers Zoe. 1 week later, the man continues to suffer as he occupies a gym. Soon the detective returns Paul's call. Paul says they met at a gun show last year in Miami. He goes on to say his girlfriend went to Key Lime, but he hasn't heard from her in 1 week. Furthermore, he doesn't think she knows anyone there. Talking to someone else now, Paul says he needs to visit Key Lime to see what is going on. He knows something happened to Zoe, yet he does not know why he even cares, because it's evident that she does not. Moving along, Paul arrives at Key Lime with his luggage. He enters the same as Zoe did, and speaks with the innkeeper. They have a hard time understanding each other due to her language being mainly Spanish. However, she comes around to give him his room number. Before he goes, he shows the innkeeper a photo of Zoe on his cell phone. He wants to know if she has seen her. For some reason, the innkeeper lies to Paul that she has not seen Zoe. When he enters his room, we see a certain woman walking around the area. Her presence is somewhat mysterious. Our attention is brought to Lopez at the bar. He also shows a photo of Zoe to several people. Currently, no one is claiming to have seen her. Back to Paul, he tries to settle into his hotel room, but we notice this is a new experience for him. As he undoes the window curtain, he jumps with fright, seeing Zoe behind the window. He seems to have hallucinated her. Thus, he lies down in bed, still full of unease. Meanwhile, we see a figure walking with a scary mask for an unknown reason. Following this, Lopez and Paul approach Peter at the beach. Paul asks Peter if he's seen Zoe, who has been missing for 10 days now. Peter claims he saw her about 1 week ago at the bar. He even mentions that he brought her to Audrey. However, he never saw her again. With this information, Paul tells the man he might be the last person who saw Zoe alive. This could mean serious trouble for him. Ending the conversation, Lopez tells Peter he doesn't want the latter to be snooping around Zoe's house. At a restaurant, Paul discovers on the internet that Lopez has earned himself an interesting achievement. The detective has a record of chugging 20 beers in 20 minutes. Paul talks to a waiter about this and expresses his surprise that such a man is running the town's police force. Additionally, he finds that a certain woman disappeared. Some people think her disappearance was due to key lime voodoo. There is a photo of the woman, revealing to us she is the one who was walking around with the mysterious presence. At the other end, Zoe arrives at Audrey's garden and tells Audrey she wants to stay there. She thinks the world is starting to open for her. Appreciating that Zoe returned, Audrey asks her if she would like to come back on Saturday. In the meantime, Paul calls Lopez to unload his disapproval on the detective from this town. He accuses Lopez of lying about being able to find his girlfriend. Paul firmly says he's taking over this investigation. Furthermore, once he finishes it, he will shut down Lopez's department. There are also missing girls who Lopez is not paying attention to. He should be looking for them 24/7. Hearing all this grating talk, Lopez tells him to calm down and says he wants to meet Paul in the morning. Paul insults him prior to ending the call. Later, we see Paul searching in the woods. That missing woman is also walking around there. He eventually comes very close to her, but doesn't seem to see the woman. She is probably a ghost. Shifting to Lopez, the detective parks his car near Audrey's house. Seeing him, Audrey ducks in her kitchen, anticipating trouble. As he starts talking behind her front door, Audrey approaches it to let him inside. Lopez says he is looking for a certain girl. He shows Audrey a photo of her on his phone, and Audrey claims she has not seen her. However, she starts to second-guess herself by saying maybe Peter brought her in. Back to Paul, we see the man asking random people if they had seen Zoe. Unfortunately, no one has. At one point, Paul tells a potential witness that he's trained to tell if people are lying. While Lopez is driving, he gets a call from Peter, who says he went by Audrey's house. He heard crazy noises coming from the greenhouse. Peeking through the window, he observed her with a female sculpture. She was yelling all sorts of chants. Then his friend told him that Audrey's grandmother had deep connections to the spirit world. Plus, she practiced voodoo. Peter says he is disturbed and is certain that something strange is going on in Audrey's house. The last time he brought a girl there, she disappeared. He concludes the phone call by saying he's never going back to her house. After that, we see Zoe visiting Audrey. who welcomes her inside. The mysterious woman is somehow there too, spying on them. Soon Audrey directs herself to the kitchen to prepare an orchid in her mortar and pestle. As Zoe is sitting in the living room, we see the mysterious woman spying on her. In a short time, Audrey brings a slice of her key lime pie to her guest, who delights in the dessert. It doesn't take long after eating it for Zoe to fall asleep on the couch. We can assume the orchids Audrey used in the pie were laced with something. Audrey then addresses the spying woman, telling her to enter. She calls her Charlene. Audrey instructs Charlene to play nice with Zoe. Looking through Zoe's purse, Audrey finds her phone, which has a missed call from Paul. She also discovers that Paul is a detective. The next scene has the man sitting with the psychic, whom Zoe was with. When Paul picks a tarot card, the psychic tells him it means the ending. Then Paul shows a photo of Zoe to him, and just like everyone else, he denies having seen her. This prompts Paul to acknowledge that something isn't right about the man. The man replies that he's a psychic, he's supposed to be different, but Paul is troubled by how everyone is being evasive with him. He can't even get one lead. The psychic says perhaps Zoe has never been in this place. These are words Paul cannot believe. He knows she has. When Paul says she is in danger, the psychic responds that Paul is the one with danger all around him. He also claims to have never heard of Audrey. Afterward, we observe those 3 doors in Audrey's house we saw at the beginning of the film. Zoe gets taken to the middle room. While she is lying on the bed there, we hear an echo of Audrey's voice, telling Zoe that Paul is gone and he has forgotten her. She says Zoe is home now. Later, she wakes up to exit the room. In the meantime, Audrey engages in a ritualistic behavior. Zoe walks into the psychic's place, where he greets her knowingly. He helps to settle the drowsy lady down. She tells him she doesn't feel good and something weird is going on. Presenting a tarot card to her, he says it's a warning. She must return. Cryptically, he says a certain they want to possess her soul. Then Lopez enters Audrey's house to search the place in her absence. He searches for a short time until he enters her garden. We see that he is being recorded by a camera. At a different time, he calls one of his colleagues, telling them to keep an eye on Audrey. He doesn't want his colleague to stop watching her before he hears from Lopez. The detective thinks she may have something to do with the missing girls. Soon we see Paul searching in the woods again. Charlene is also there, walking around. Meanwhile, Audrey is engaged in her ritual behavior. Doing so seems to bring pain to Paul. She says it is the end, before telling Zoe to come to her, which Zoe does. During her ritual, Audrey burns Paul's detective badge, saying it is his end. As this is taking place, we observe poor Zoe sitting somewhere in a miserable state. Paul's persistent search for Zoe gets him to engage in drinking and driving. As Zoe laughs disorientedly, Audrey yells out that she is hers. Alas, an exhausted Paul sits in his car. He eventually sees his girlfriend in the rearview mirror, making him exit the car to run to her. But she now walks in the woods like a ghostly presence. Audrey is there too with a painted mask. She laughs manically and performs her voodoo on Paul to hurt him. Thankfully, seeing her makes him approach the wicked woman. Although she delivers him much pain with her magic, the detective manages to shoot her with his gun. Then he directs himself at her, only to discover it was Zoe. Of course, this brings him to the ground, where he grieves for her. His cries are followed by an agonized scream. Strangely, she vanishes right near him in a matter of seconds. Thus, he stands up and calls out to her. 1 month later, Paul seems to be back at home. He gets a phone call from none other than Zoe. Picking it up, he looks at the cell phone in puzzlement. When he answers it, we hear another woman telling him she is going to Key Lime. Shortly after, the operator tells Paul that the number he has dialed is not in service. Soon, this other woman arrives at Key Lime and hears Audrey's maniacal laughter. Unfortunately, we see she has started to talk to Audrey, who is responsible for an unknown amount of disappearances. The film concludes with the new visitor wanting to look at Audrey's orchids, depicting the repeat of an eerie cycle.